A very warm welcome on behalf of the University of London to all our students, prospective students, our alumni, our friends and our partners this evening. There's a real range of people here tonight. We held an event a year ago. I know some of you were here, and I apologise last year because I had a horrendous cough, which was not COVID. So this is the real me, perfectly healthy, not going to infect anyone. And it was very much a transitional year last year. We had restrictions on the numbers of people around the table. So it's very much nice to see everyone together as more of a, what I'd call normal event tonight. I'm Bill Abraham. I'm the Director of Development here at the University of London. I'm delighted to welcome you all here today, and I'll be introducing the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Wendy Thompson, shortly, as well as the esteemed panellists, Mr. Sia Chin Seong, the President and CEO of the Singapore Institute of Management, Dr. Lizzie Vadakal, the Country Director for the British Council here in Singapore, and Charles Tan, one of our own alumni and the co-founder of Basis Capital and a portfolio manager at Pilgrim Partners Asia. I had some housekeeping. Apologies for those of you who had your drinks confiscated. I promise there's more outside. We'll start the evening with the Vice-Chancellor, followed by then a panel discussion on the future of work. I'm at the right event. After the panel have introduced themselves and some official remarks, we'll have some questions from using Slido. Hopefully this code will be on the screen shortly, so you can log in. There's been a few questions already. Yep. #UL Future of Work. Please put in whatever questions you'd like to see that hasn't been mentioned or a response to something that's been mentioned in the panel discussion. I will do my best to collate questions to put them towards the panel at the end. There's no way we're going to get through everything because I know all of you will ask more questions than we have time for. So encourage, if your question doesn't get answered or you've got a burning question that you didn't ask, to put that forward in the networking reception after the formal panel event. Following the Q&A, we'll have some closing remarks from the Vice-Chancellor, and then, as I say, a networking reception with structured networking. You'll have seen outside some hubs for those who've got an interest in any of the professional areas: banking and finance, accountancy and professional services, technology and digital, legal sector and governance. Each area has got at least 2 of our own alumni who are manning those areas for discussion. Please go and get them to answer your questions or ask for advice or their comments about either working those areas or if you're interested in something in that area. We know that's not all the sectors, and if you've got comments and things about things that we could do differently, please feed back to me or any of my colleagues. Big thanks to my colleagues Peter and Holly over there who've put this together. Hopefully it all goes smoothly. If it goes wrong, it's my fault. I guess without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Wendy Thompson, the Vice-Chancellor of the University.
Thank you, Bill. Well, good evening and welcome to you all here tonight. Alumni, students, applicants, and distinguished guests. It's really great to have an occasion like this. I'm particularly wanting to mention a welcome to people from our recognized teaching centers, which are a really important part of what we do here in Singapore. Mr. Sia Chin Seong, who's President and CEO of the Singapore Institute of Management, who's on the panel this evening, as well as Professor Leon Chung, who's Regional CEO of Amity Global. Big welcome to him as well. And I also want to thank, as well as welcome, Dr. Lizzie Vadakal, who's Country Director, as Bill's just said, from the British Council Singapore, who's also one of our panelists, and our other valued local partners from the ACCA, the British Chamber of Commerce, CPA Australia, FinTech Academy, and the RELC. So many distinguished guests, and welcome to you all here this evening. It really gives me huge pleasure to be able to come to an occasion like this. Being able to travel is still a bit of a sort of a treat so far. We haven't been able to do it for a while. And connect with the University of London's global community. I'm just thrilled really to be able to be with you here tonight. I think I've only managed to get here, once a year in recent times, and a bit of a gap in between. But I know now that we can, I think, be more confident that we can travel more regularly. And, I have made some recent trips both to Hong Kong and Uganda, as well as today to Singapore. And really, it's one of the most, I think, inspiring parts of the job is being able to meet graduating students and staff who are involved in teaching their programs. And I know I'm here this trip and delighted to be able to get to the graduation ceremonies for students graduating from the Singapore Institute of Management, which will be something I get the pleasure of doing tomorrow and the next day with colleagues here from LSE. So it is one of the greatest parts of the job. It's a great honour of meeting University of London students from across the globe at these ceremonies. We've had some recently as well held in London, where we had about 2,000 students come to the Barbican in London and receive their awards, on site, if you like, in London. And it's great to get to meet them and to hear some of their stories about how they've managed to combine their often rich lives in work or, with other responsibilities alongside studying. So it's a real pleasure this time of year to get to meet students at graduations. It's especially good to be able to get out of London and into the world because we are truly a global community at the University of London. We have 45,000 students in 190 countries on more than 100 different study programs. So it's a pretty unique program and an amazing number of students that are studying with us at any given time. And our links with Singapore, as people here will know, I guess, are extremely important and long-enduring. We have more than 5,000 students studying, just at the moment, a University of London degree. And our alumni community includes over 60,000 people who are currently living in Singapore. I have to check this number every so often to think, I so often go back, is this true? Can we really have that many? But we do, and it is it's a very significant proportion of the population here in Singapore. About 1 in every 100 people at some point have earned a University of London degree. And the university has a very active and long-standing University of London alumni group in Singapore, and the leaders of that group are with us this evening. In particular, I want to recognize Juliet Chan, Juliet Chan Tay and Joel Toel, Sin Hong Wee and C.S. Tay for their work on the executive committee of the group. They really are the backbone of the alumni. And today we have over 10 alumni ambassadors in Singapore who are part of our recently launched Alumni Ambassador Program. Ambassadors, as I guess you can tell from the name implies, they play an important role giving advice and guidance to current and prospective students, as well as participating in our career panels and podcasts. Many of them will be co-leading the networking sessions this evening, so please, I hope you'll take the opportunity to speak with them. We enjoy close and long-term relations with our colleagues in the High Commission and the British Council here in Singapore, and are pleased to work closely with our recognised teaching centres, as I've said. Notably, our nearly 40-year partnership with Singapore Institute of Management. It's a really long-enduring and important relationship. In recent years, we've seen the importance of flexibility in how we learn and continue to innovate with our Federation members in London as well, and with our partners around the world. And I think we're proud to, continue to find new and innovative ways of enabling access to high-quality education, particularly in some of the uncertain times we've experienced in recent years. So tonight we're kind of doing a bit of crystal ball gazing, looking into the future of work and how to best prepare for it. It's something we probably all need to do, but particularly our students who are graduating and recent alumni thinking about, what is this world that they're entering into. Some may already be working, but I think everyone recognizes the major changes that are undergoing in employment. And perhaps it hasn't always been the case that universities have seen preparing students for work as one of their key roles, but we certainly do at the University of London. And we know that the global knowledge and skills you gain from taking a university degree can help future-proof your career. In addition, career support for current students and recent alumni has grown in recent years with the launch of dedicated career support for our students studying through distance, flexible and blended learning. You've seen probably the little pamphlet that was available at the desk as you entered in from our career service. This, as I say, is a relatively new service that we have developed and invested significantly in to support students as they're graduating in our programs around the world. So tonight we're here to discuss the future of work. As I say, a bit of crystal ball gazing. I don't think anyone can be certain what that future looks like, but I think it's an interesting topic to put our minds to and think about how, as I say, we can all best prepare for it. I also know that many of you in the audience have a wealth of knowledge that students could benefit from hearing. So these events after the formal panel are ones that we know we can expect a lot from the audience as well as from the panelists to contribute to, sharing really the benefit of your networks as well as your knowledge really with alumni, current students and partners. And if you're with your consent, we'll be happy to capture some of that advice, some of those exchanges, so that we can encourage our students to see the benefit of some of what the services they'll get from studying here in Singapore. So that's all that you'll hear from me. I sometimes feel the need to say, though, that if those who have a keen ear for an accent are saying, she doesn't sound like she's from London, right? And it's true. But I have been in London a very long time, but the accent's Canadian if you're trying to place it. I'm just going to take that quizzical thought that may be in your mind, out of your mind, and say that I'm one of those students, who came to study in London and really never went home. So it's been a life-changing experience for me that I can speak to as an international student. So now I'm delighted to welcome our esteemed panelists who have agreed very kindly to join us this evening. We'll hear from Mr. Seah Chin Seong. I'll ask them to take their seats as I call their names, if you don't mind, who is President and CEO of the Singapore Institute of Management. We have Lizzie Vadaker from the British High Commission, who again can join us now, and Charles Tan, who's the University of London alumnus and co-founder of Basis Capital PT Limited and portfolio manager of Pilgrim Partners Asia. So without more ado, if I can ask you to join me in the panel, and we'll kick off. A bit like being on a television panel show, isn't it? But I'm sure we're all going to figure this out, so it's going to be great. And we're assured that these mics are going to work whenever we speak at them, so that's how we're going to do it. So maybe I'll just start by inviting each of you to say a bit about yourselves just before we start talking about the topic itself. And I'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And hi, everyone. Glad to be here. I'd like to thank Professor Wendy for having me here and together with the other panelists. My name is Chin Seong. I'm President and CEO of the Singapore Institute of Management. In case you're wondering why I've got a job title that says President and CEO, it's because of the unique nature of SIM, where I've got the academy on one side, so President, and then when I have to deal with work with industry, it's a CEO title. So that's how I got the title of President and CEO. I joined SM about 4 years ago, and one of the things that we're looking at, and you probably have heard a lot about in Singapore, is really preparing the workforce in Singapore for the future of work through lifelong learning. And we'll talk more about that later. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lizzie. I'm the country director of the British Council. Not the British High Commission, Wendy, though we do share a fence.
I don't know if that's a promotion or demotion, is it? But I'll let you think.
Well, the High Commissioner would be a little surprised, but coming back to the topic, I'm the country director of the British Council in Singapore. We work very closely with the High Commission, just putting that out there as well. So what the British Council is the UK's cultural relations organisation. What we do is in about 110 countries in which we work, we try to bring the best of the UK to the countries in which we operate, and in this case, Singapore, and the best of what we have in Singapore, share that with the UK as well. So what we're looking at is mutual learning, mutual understanding, looking at common problems, therefore common solutions, and making those connections between the countries of the world. And with those connections, therefore building understanding between people, that understanding leading to trust, and that trust then, those people-to-people links, helping us to become that, we talk about global citizenship, but that's the mission of the British Council. So we've been in Singapore now, this is our 76th year. And what Professor Thompson was mentioning, working with alumni, not just from the University of London, of course, but representing the whole of the UK, the thousands and thousands of Singaporeans who have gone to the UK, studied there, and then come back and are now doing fantastic work in their professions, in their communities, in their societies. Our work is connecting with those Singaporeans, and again, doing that bit of building those bridges between the UK and Singapore. So that's in a nutshell what the British Council does. We will look at, therefore, future of work and how we are working with students, with the alumni when they come back, and looking at how that work landscape is changing and what our prospective students as well as alumni who have come back from studies, what's the sort of future that they are looking forward to and what are the sort of skills that they would need in this sort of volatile future that we are looking forward to. Thank you.
Thanks, Lizzie. And Charles?
Sure. Hi, my name is Charles. I was just reminded that I graduated from the UOL International Program 16 years ago now. So it's been a while. So yeah, I went through the BSc Banking and Finance program. I then headed off to the LSE for a year to finish up my master's. Ended up spending almost 10 years in London, working in finance. I came back to Singapore about 6 or 7 years ago for family reasons and to start my own family. Currently, I am officially a portfolio manager, very boring, in an MAS regulated firm. And unofficially, I work on cryptocurrency related projects, none of which you will have heard about for very, very particular reasons, which we can talk about later. But yeah, looking forward to sharing thoughts on this panel.
Thanks, everyone. So we have a few issues that we'd like to explore. I say I don't think there's right or wrong answers to these questions. Really things probably that we all talk about in our own workplaces. I mean, I think one of the first triggers of change that we wanted to focus on was post-pandemic, really the return to work, or are people returning to work? I guess is a question. I think around the world, certainly in the West, where we find ourselves, many people are re-evaluating their relationship to work. Do they really want to come into the office as often or at all? A lot of people retired, I think, and didn't return. There's real questions around labor, supply, certainly in London. So this is a different context. Maybe Singaporeans have a different relationship to work, but it'd be really interesting to hear, how this experience of working from home, a lockdown on and off for a number of years, how it's really affected people's relationship to work, their presence, and and their motivation really. Be interested in getting your different perspectives. And because you're sitting right beside me, you get to go first.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of give maybe a few observations. Post-pandemic, in pandemic, I think Zoom became the most popular app in the world, right? Because that's how you transcend that closed border situation. What we do experience is post-pandemic, there are actually intergenerational differences in terms of working from home and coming back to the office. And you can see amongst the older generations, there's a certain preference for a certain style, the younger generations and so on, depending also on the job scope, the job role. somewhere at SIM, for example, almost 50% of our people, 50% want to come back to work. They say we want a space. 50% says, no, can I just work from home, 5 days a week? And there's clear intergenerational differences between them. And this is one of the things that I think we're also trying to address in terms of how then that affects the person's effectiveness. The second is we realize that technology then becomes so important that almost everyone has to be native with technology. How they use technology to work, and especially recently with AGI or general ChatGPT and so on. We realize that besides technology, our people suddenly realize in a pandemic situation where you have to do things differently, and the range of skills and knowledge that's required to do the job has shifted a bit because of the constraints. Not all of them actually are comfortable. It also forces many of them to examine, self-examine, reassess. How do I deal with this change at the workplace? So the pandemic actually creates a number of mindset shifts as well. Besides just working from home, but it's also a fundamental relook of what is the purpose of work. Fortunately or unfortunately, there was also a period where, because they're working from home, they actually have more time to reflect on what is this all about. If we got 8 hours of Zoom meetings a day, why am I doing this? What's it for? And so on. So that has actually an impact on our workforce as well. And I think it's also generally has been an impact for many of the professionals in industry. I'm going to just pause now, maybe pass it to my fellow panelists.
Yeah, Lizzie.
Yeah, let me go next. So I agree a lot with what Mr. Sia said. For us, what we've noticed at work is also we've got that 50% of people who prefer working from home and like the flexibility, and the other 50%, including myself, who want to actually get out of home and come into the office and meet with people. And for me particularly, it was being able to shut down at one point of time and then go home saying your working day is done. One of the shifts I saw with working from home was you're constantly on, you're constantly working. And particularly when we are working with different time zones, different regions, when the UK wakes up, we should be done, but we're not done because they are on the other side of the line. So I think that bit of anytime, anywhere, how does the movie go? Everything at once. That's one of the big changes that I have been seeing in the workplace. Some people appreciate that, having that flexibility and deciding on when it is that they're most productive. And those are the colleagues who are continuing to work from home. A lot of the others are missing out with the water cooler talks, the camaraderie, that culture that gets built with just, crossing each other and stopping by and having a quick chat in the office. And I think that the difference that we are seeing is particularly in the younger colleagues. By younger, I mean newer colleagues who joined us during the pandemic period, who've not had that experience of the socialization in the office. There I see a little bit of that, not feeling part of the organization. It's that family feeling. It becomes a lot more difficult to replicate that when you're on Teams. We don't use Zoom when we're on Teams. So that becomes a lot more difficult, I think. And we are slowly trying to encourage colleagues to maybe keep that flexibility, but have a purpose to come into the office, not come into the office for the sake of coming into the office, but maybe teams have their meetings together and organize 1 day a week, 2 days of the week, where you're actually coming in so that you have a purpose for that, for coming into the office. So there is that 50-50 of people who prefer having that flexibility around.
Sure, I'll just quickly offer my thoughts. I just want to caveat very quickly that I don't speak for all industries, just my own personal experience. In terms of the changing nature of work, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, before COVID, we used to pay $3,500 a month just for a shared working space in Central CBD, Republic Plaza. And yeah, like when COVID hit, we just said, why do we need this? And it turns out we didn't. And so, we've ended up just really cutting away a lot of the fat. I think in the industry that I currently occupy, I guess we're also quite fortunate that that we didn't need a physical office. We always assumed that we would need one. Just that's because that's how everyone does it. Everyone has a nice office in the CBD. You have a nice meeting room, and you bring them in, and you serve them Evian water, and so on and so forth, right? And we just realized that actually, you know what? Like, if I show you my results and I can prove that these are audited numbers, and as long as we're making 10% per annum and it's consistent, and our maximum drawdown is less than 2%, then happy days. You're going to sign a contract. I'm going to have your business. But that's finance. That's me. That's the industry that we occupy. I'll just quickly say as well that COVID was very funny because it was definitely a time for change and transition for a lot of us. And funnily enough, just a personal anecdote, that was actually the time where I fell into the cryptocurrency sector. Funny story, but actually the way I came about it was because I was organizing possibly illegal poker nights at my place. And the people that turned up to play poker with me, about half of them were in cryptocurrency. So that's, I think, yeah, in terms of how the pandemic has changed the nature of work, I actually feel quite positive about how things have actually panned out post-pandemic.
Well, there you have it. Maybe we've observed a bit of the generational shift as we went across the panel, and you can see. I guess I'm a social scientist. That's my academic discipline. So I tend to think people need people, but I recognize this seems to be a minority perspective these days amongst our students. But it'd be one of the issues I think it'd be really interesting to hear people's comments on, either in the questions as you put them to Slido or in the workshops perhaps after, because you can imagine this on the short run, but but do we become kind of atomistic Hobbesian kind of creatures as a result of this? When do we get together to create things that social people do? Anyway, question. But recognizing there was even on the London Tube, someone had placed notices on every seat saying, call this number and you'll never have to use the tube and go to work again. And it was people from the tech industry, who were recruiting people, and they'd found a new angle to do this. So, but that sort of worries me, really, in a way, because cities and people seem to me to be a social phenomenon. But anyway, we'll discuss, as we say. In this introductory kind of comments, you all touched on technology, and I guess that's what's facilitated as well as driven some of these changes. And in the last few months, we particularly heard about the AI phenomenon that people were kind of anticipating, but now it's kind of hit the market, so to speak, and it's even pre initially. Massive discussion within the academic world about what this might mean for our sector. But I think more generally, it's got a real buzz about what it means and how it's going to affect how we work. So that's the next topic. I'm going to start with the other way round, just so that we give Charles the first dibs at this particular question. How's technology going to change the workplace and perhaps the nature of work itself?
Yep, thanks very much for the question. Funny anecdote, when Holly first contacted me about the panel, one of the things that she asked me to do was to provide a short bio. And I remember sitting in front of a computer and just going, I'm not sure I can come up with 200 words to describe myself, really. And so what I did was, I know, I'll just put my LinkedIn profile into ChatGPT and see what comes out. And surprisingly, like the output was not too badly mangled. So with a bit of prompt engineering, which I think is what they call it these days, you tell ChatGPT to improve it in this way and that, and you slightly tweak it here and there. And I think within like 3 prompts, I basically got to the point where I was like, yeah, I think that works. And so I just copied and pasted that and sent it across to Holly. And so I guess it's my it's my personal view, but I do think that ChatGPT and AI in general is really very exciting. It's also pretty scary. In terms of how far we've come in, I think literally 6 months since ChatGPT hit like the headlines, like the mainstream media headlines. I think it's pretty scary to see how far it's come. We were just discussing with some folks out there during networking drinks how different and how much more advanced ChatGPT 4 is versus ChatGPT 3, and how, like, for example, certain professions like paralegals are just probably going to be obsolete in the coming months or even years. Because ChatGPT 4 apparently can score in the top 10% of the bar exam, and that's something which I think will catch a lot of people unawares, and I think there are a lot more industries where AI is coming for you. Now, that's not to say that it's completely hopeless and that the future of work is that we're all going to be out of work. I don't think that's true at all. Technological improvement has been the one true constant throughout the history of mankind. Whether it's a shift from, I don't know, like whaling to crude oil, or from crude oil to renewable energies. At every stage, we've made massive leaps in efficiency and improvements in general. And yes, there have been people that have been displaced, but we shouldn't fear that, but rather we embrace that and we find different ways to sort of cope and adapt, really. And so I'll just end off by saying that we shouldn't really fear what's to come, but rather just maybe sign up with SIM and take a few more courses to sort of upskill and reskill, because we very well could end up in a situation in an economy where we're all sitting in front of computers and we're all prompt engineers. And whether you're an artist or a programmer, I don't think AI replaces all of that need. I mean, it probably replaces that at a very basic level, like very basic paralegals, very basic coders. But you still need a senior level engineer. You still need like a senior lawyer to actually construct the argument, put it together. You need a senior coder to make sure that everything is put together right and that the app actually does work. So yeah, that's my view on how it's moving.
Thanks, Charles. I'm going to jump over and come to Mr. Seong.
I thought I could get away. It's a very big question, because when you look at ChatGPT and when you start to look at its capabilities and its implications, it's massive what it's going to do. I was having dinner with my son. He's a lawyer. He's just directed 2 of his staff, go and research for me 2 cases because I need this to argue for my client. And they've been spending 3 days doing it. So I said, why don't you get into ChatGPT and find it yourself? There you go. He found the 2 cases. And his staff was spending 3 days looking and he still haven't found it. Then one of my daughter is, her boyfriend is a doctor, started to say, what is that? Let me try it, right? And he was asking ChatGPT a very specific, specialized medical procedure. And it's so precise, the specific equipment, the specific procedure for a certain operation that only deep specialists know is there. And then they were like, okay, wow. Then I said, well, why don't you ask ChatGPT to tell you a joke? So yeah, tell me a joke. So the joke goes like, why is the tomato red? Because it saw the salad dressing. Then you ask ChatGPT, why is it funny? Well, it explains to you step by step why it's a joke. And you're like, oh my goodness. Then one of my staff had this thing about writing our annual report. We had to write a letter to a Chinese national. You just write in English and then say, ChatGPT translate it into a Chinese letter, but do it in a warm manner. Boom. That's it. Under normal circumstances, we have to find a translator, we have to do this. And all of a sudden, knowledge work becomes compressed. All of a sudden. We did a research on job disruption with someone who has 10 years of the US job data, the last 10 years, to figure out whether jobs are being disrupted, you know, as it starts to go up from the lower levels up. And every task that's cognitive in nature potentially can be disrupted. So then the implications is quite, you know, some people scary, you know. So what can it not do that I'm doing, right? And we're still starting there. I'm still starting there. We're still trying to figure out what is the full implication for lawyers, for even for doctors, for auditors, for what I can say is we have not seen the limits of it yet. But what we do know is in the foreseeable future, the kind of work that probably our professionals have to do is going to be a lot more complex in nature. You know, synthesis, integration of different disciplines. We're beginning to see jobs requiring increased range of skills, and not just increased range of skills, but the depth of understanding in each field. Of course, you can then rely on ChatGPT to give you that, but we're seeing kind of extending that out and so on. And the kind of services that's being provided in different industry is going to slowly get into more and more complex kind of job roles, and that's why I think that is going to pan out in the future. Thank you.
Lizzie.
I'm going to come to it from an education standpoint. And I think we are all aware that schools in Singapore, as well as the higher education sector, the polytechnics, the universities, we are embracing this technology. It's not something that we are going to be able to get away from, but we are giving the credit to our youngsters, saying they will know what to do. They're going to pick it up anyways, whether we say, you know, we're banning ChatGPT, you can't use this for your coursework and your academic writing and so on. They're going to pick up those skills, but we are going to have to support the students in fine-tuning the skills that they would need to identify, okay, like you said, right, the first draft has been created. How do you sense check this? How do you look at what we call information literacy? How much of that is true? How do you refine your questioning, the prompts that you mentioned, so that you would get deeper, more clearer explanation of the content that you're asking for? In schools, the International Baccalaureate has adopted ChatGPT, saying we are going to be using this. It is a technology that's going to be helpful to the students. But what we are going to aim at is those higher order thinking skills. You've got this. How do you analyze this? How do you evaluate this content that the technology has generated? How do you ask the right prompts to get the information that you need? How do you synthesize that information? How do you fact check? How do you look at alternative arguments now? How do you use that for your debating, your critical thinking, your reasoning? How do you get your creativity into those prompts and those questioning styles? So all of those higher order skills that we want our students to have, this can be a tool to start off. And schools are adopting that already. The ministries have said we are going to be using that with civil servants to be writing minutes, to be doing those kind of mundane jobs, right? Write your minutes, do the first draft of the speech, take away that bit, and then let's look at how we fine-tune and how we improve and take things further. So I read a quote somewhere which said, this technology it's not going to be a crutch. It's not going to be something that is going to replace everything else that we do. It's going to be a trampoline that we are going to be using to take us to greater heights with the technology that is available. And we are going to have to trust our children, students, younger generation, that they will know what to do and how to evaluate and how to make sensible judgments while maintaining the academic integrity that we would expect of them when they're doing the coursework and the studies. Just like we use the calculator now, right? This is the next generation of calculators. We don't think of that as cheating when we're using the calculator. So I think that's where technology is going. And maybe some of us laggards, I didn't even know there's a chat 4.0. Some of us will take time to reach there, but we'll get there, like Alexa, asking Alexa a question, asking, hey Google a question, and then refining that question so that we get the right answer. So I think it's the technology of the future, and we are going to have to adapt and learn accordingly.
Interesting perspectives on it. I think it is here to stay. So, I mean, I think some people have said, you know, you're not going to put this genie back in the bottle. So it's a question of how we handle it. And, you know, thinking about it from, you know, an academic point of view, it really throws into question what the purpose of some conventional education is going to be. Because we conventionally, you know, impart knowledge with varying degrees of creativity or challenge, but largely it still is a conveying of knowledge, and we test people's ability to grasp it, you know, even if it's, you know, another layer of abstraction and critical. But I mean, a lot of education is still quite a banking model. It's imparted and it's tested. So that is all going to require a completely different approach. And they've beat us to it. So I think it feels a lot of the academic world is in a bit of a catch-up mode, and may try and squish that genie back in the bottle for at least a few months more while we figure out how to begin a whole new way of assessing people and judging, you know, what success in academic world looks like. So that's another sort of set of questions that you might want to throw at the panel. You know, is what does this mean? Also, you know, I'm a social scientist, so perspective matters. You know, is there really universal knowledge and everybody says the same thing? It's a rather positivist view of the world. You know, maybe we're going to have cultural nuances. You know, most MBAs have a whole section on cultural competence, and you know, how's that going to handle all of this? Anyway, I'm going to throw those really open-ended questions for the last few comments from you, and then we'll take some questions from the room. And now I'll start with the conventional on my right to go.
Yeah, I think what worries me with the way the pace of technology that is going is that we're going to see, and I hope I'm wrong, but increasing reliance on AI to think for us. In as much as we don't walk that distance anymore because we got mobile device, we got cars, we got vehicles, we got things to bring us. The same about our neural muscle may one day suffer as a result of this over-reliance on AI to decide and to think for us. There's a joke that goes around, you know, smartphones make people dumb. And you know, we think it's funny, right? Until you start to realize if this thing gets really pervasive and everything is thought of for every one of us, then what happens? What do you do with, you know, your intellectual capacity in a highly ubiquitous, AI ubiquitous society? I mean, that's what I think is really concerning for me. Thank you.
I'm still looking at it from a very positive angle. I have a 15-year-old at home and a 17-year-old going on 18. So these are the digitally literate generation that we're talking about. One of the examples of how we worked during the pandemic was everything was webinars. We didn't have physical meetings, so we had lectures, we had career talks, which are all webinars. And we recorded everything, and then we posted these videos onto YouTube. And what we were looking at is meaningful engagement, how many people were watching these videos later on. And you had hour-long sessions, and you needed those skills to be able to trim and remove the pauses and, you know, put the caption in the front and add the logo and so on. It was my 15-year-old who did this easily. I had to pay him. That was a different matter. but they've got those skills. They've got that knowledge. I remember when I was in university, we were told about Wikipedia. Do not use Wikipedia as your reference. You don't know how accurate that information is. You better not cite that or quote that. And yet, I would still go to Wikipedia, I still do, for that first, even if it's review of a movie. I watch the movie, I don't understand what it is, I'm going to go and look in Wikipedia to get the storyline. But we know how much of that we can, with a pinch of salt, that bit of things, right? So I think, again, I'm going back to our generation, this generation of students, of youngsters. They are digitally literate, they are going to be using technology, but they are also having, I assume, I'm very positive, that we have given them the skills to be able to navigate that world. And they're probably better placed to be able to navigate that. And like Wendy said, we are going to play catch up then and see, okay, this is the generation that we are working with. How do we maximize that potential which they have? Mr. Sia mentioned that he was drawing that T-shaped graduate that we used to talk about. You have the breadth of knowledge and you have the depth of knowledge as well. We moved past that to the Greek letter pi. You have the breadth of knowledge and you need depth in at least 2 disciplines. And I remember the president of NU was saying, that's long gone. Now we're talking about Marina Bay Sands. You need depth of knowledge into at least 3 different specialization areas while keeping that breadth, which is the transferable part of the skills that we are looking at. And I think, technology is going to be digital, is going to be a part of that. Singapore, we've identified, right, the 3 economies of the future. We're talking about green economy and care economy and digital economy. It's going to be part and parcel of our life and our future. And the children, the youngsters are well ahead of us in that respect. By us, I mean my generation. There are youngsters out there who probably very much adept with technological use, yes.
Charles.
Right. So, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned Wikipedia because I've got a funny anecdote. We were having a chat, having a quick catch up with a couple of friends a few days ago, and we were talking about how outside this tuition center, there were a couple of these elderly Chinese grandmothers, each boasting about how incredible their grandkids were in terms of just like rote learning, just memorizing banks of knowledge, right? And my friend and I started like trying to sort of like dissect like why were they doing that? And I think what the takeaway from that conversation was really that they're still kind of stuck in that sort of imperial China sort of like education system. Like back then, and we can kind of understand like why that came about, because back then they didn't have Wikipedia. So your best bet of finding someone intelligent or like finding information was just someone who was a walking Wikipedia, someone who just knew everything, someone who just memorized and regurgitated stuff. And then of course we had the internet, and then of course we had Wikipedia, and of course now we've got ChatGPT. I highlight that because I'm just going to sort of take that to its logical conclusion and just say that, yeah, going on a limb here, but I think AI in general is just, we are going to reach like AGI, right? I think we are going to reach that faster than we think. I think that computers are going to take over a lot of what we're currently paying a lot of middle office like middle office stuff to do at the moment. But that's not to say that all is lost, but rather I think we kind of go back to first principles, which is if you're looking for work, if you want, and assuming that part of what drives demand for work is money and just staying alive really. I was told very, very early on, if you want to make money, fix a problem, and if you want to make more money, fix a bigger problem. And I don't think that's changed, right? And so ChatGPT, it really is just another tool for us to help fix problems. I would also go out on the limb here and say that perhaps like one of the things that might result is that we might see more work in these sort of less regulated or unregulated or maybe perhaps grayer industries, because one of the things that ChatGPT is not going to replace is if you have not saying I've done any of this, but if you need to move money from, say, Myanmar to Singapore to pay for a shipment of oil to a sanctioned country, ChatGPT is not going to solve that for you. But there is demand for that, and that's a problem. And that's a problem that you need fixing. And there's a lot of money to be made there, so maybe that's one of the things that's going to happen.
All right, well, we'll draw a veil onto that one. And we'll take some questions. Just a couple, probably, because I know we want to get into the chance to network a little bit. But Bill, I'm sure we've generated, I would think, some questions.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh.
Yes.
And Charles, I'm going to name check you twice because I took your point about the sort of the learning by rote and how it's changing. But the minute you mentioned that example, I just thought actually one of the questions, I mean, there's been 36 questions, quite a lot about ChatGPT. There's quite a few questions about how will I get a job with a University of London degree, you know, helping me to get into banking and finance. Those sort of career questions, please use the hub for that. That's really good, or you can come and speak to us. I'm going to try and sort of collate some of these questions, but on that last point about the subjective nature of learning and those with experiences, and this almost follows on from the event we had last year. What is the role of experienced people and ESG and the expectations of our new graduates in things like the environment and sustainable economy and ethics, Charles? So what's the sort of the role of ESG in all of these things?
We won't put Charles on the spot right yet. But whoever wants to jump in.
I could start again. I'm coming from an education angle for this. So something that has happened over the past, maybe last year alone, is students across our 6 public universities here in Singapore, they've come together to form this committee, which is holding the universities, holding them accountable for ESG matters. What are you doing as far as environment is concerned, as far as sustainability is concerned, as far as corporate governance is concerned? So the students, again, this younger generation that we are talking about, across the 6 public universities, they have banded together saying, all of you, NUS, NTU, SMU, you tell me what you are doing as far as these corporate responsibilities are concerned, because that is something that is important to us. So that sense of civic-mindedness, of social responsibility, working with the sustainable education goals, development goals that we are talking about, particularly in a country like Singapore, we are talking about climate change, we are talking about carbon net zero, we've set our targets for that. This generation is engaged with that and is holding us, older folk, to account for that. So I think that is something that we are seeing across the youth all over the world, but definitely so we've got evidence of that here in Singapore.
Yeah, I think just add to that, we are one of those who were called. I guess that the topic was, you know, what do you do with investments? Why are you investing in fossil oil companies and so on? But I would say that, you know, in today's VUCA world where things are changing so fast, oftentimes our young is always questioning the purpose. And I think this is something that I see emerging, corporate purpose. What is the purpose of the company? There is a trend towards, you know, that companies should, whether use AI or not, in whatever means that you achieve its objectives, corporates needs to have a purpose. And the purpose must be one that makes profitable solutions that solves the problems of people and planet. I mean, it's a big statement, right? If you come up with solutions that's profitable, that solves the problems of people and planet, I think you're on the right track. Now, then the rest are all strategies, technologies, and what. It's when the purpose of a company is creating solutions, profitable solutions, that create problems for people and planet, that becomes a problem for our young generation. And oftentimes we've got to explain ultimately what's the DNA of the corporate, ultimately how we use technology, how we take on ESG and so on. it rolls up to what is the DNA, what is the fundamental reason for existence for any company. We find that very important when we engage our young, and that purpose gives them the North Star or the room and space for them to be creative in terms of how they can go about achieving that. But coming up with profitable solutions that solve the problems of people and planet. Anyway, and that's what I hope all corporates will go that way ultimately, and people will harness the technologies and the capabilities that come with technology to achieve continuously solutions for people and planet. Thank you.
So, sorry, Bill, could I just clarify the question again? Because I think it was pretty long, and like ethics was only just one part of it.
It was, yeah, it was, apologies for that, I should have been more succinct. It was really, what is the role of ESG in the future of work? Things like ethical questions, having a sustainable economy, not just focusing on the sort of micro of how will ChatGPT affect us. It's the sort of the more subjective areas, which was what you were alluding to, that you need a more ethical way to do business, not just ask a computer to give you the answer.
Well, I mean, I'll be the first to admit that I don't think I've too much more to add to what my fellow two panelists have already said. I think it's already been it's a pretty well flagged issue that AI doesn't really have ethics. And if if left to its own devices, like ChatGPT might end up murdering everybody on this planet. But yeah, I'm probably not best positioned to comment on this particular question.
Fair enough. I think we've got time for one more.
Okay, just one.
Yep. So post-COVID, we'll move sort of away from some of those things, but post-COVID is how, and there was a lot of likes for a question about how can employers and employees balance the benefits and challenges of hybrid working? And I'd also add to that is how do we manage the expectations of our workforce, whether it's young graduates or those with more experience? So how do we manage the expectations of, as you said, a widely disparate group of people in the future?
So work-life balance, you know, and sort of managing the diverse expectations, I guess, of the workforce. You've probably got a big workforce, so I'm going to.
Yeah. So
I'm sure these are thoughts you've had.
I think it's very multidimensional. There's intergenerational. There's whether it's hybrid, physical, work-life balance. I would say that by and large, it's going to be one of those balancing we've got to continuously evolve over time with our employees. It's very hard to pin down because work-life balance is also very subjective. If you are a single mother and so on, then time is important. You want to stay at home and work because you got a 3-year-old kid. But if you're single and you're pursuing your career, you want to get it, then you work hard, you come to the office. And it also depends on the stage of life where it is. I think most HR professionals today and most business leaders today are quite well informed of where the pressure points and all that. And there is a lot of sharing amongst the business community as well in terms of how to manage the pressure points for different employees. But I'll say this, right? Well-being is fundamental. And you see a lot of mental health issues today because I think most organizations don't know how to manage that, because it's actually very complex. There's even AI today that if you just talk to it, it will tell you whether you've got mental health issues and take preventive care and so on. But it is getting to a point now where the nature of work today, and I'm going to talk about it separately, but how job is designed today and how it's contributing to some of these well-being issues needs to also be re-examined when we talk about work-life balance, because ultimately the outcome is employee well-being. And employee well-being is also complex because it's a function of, am I engaged in my work? Am I growing? Am I progressing? Do I feel I'm purposefully and meaningfully engaged in the job? And I think that will continue always to be the challenge for most corporate leaders. A never-ending goal for them to achieve. Thanks.
I would echo that. I think that's not a, we don't have the answer yet on how much of, what's the working style going to be like for our colleagues. What I have noticed in my workplace is we've got job roles which require being present in the office, frontline customer service and sales and teachers in classrooms, the examiners who are delivering our IELTS exams and so on. So those people do have to come in. We have colleagues who can very well don't have to turn up into the office. They are perfectly fine and capable of completing their tasks by working remotely. But one of the challenges then is there is a tension between those two kinds of employees as well, where there's this feeling of, it doesn't seem fair. There's a tension. It has been happening over the past 3 years. It is continuing now. And I don't think we have the answers yet. We are still trying to navigate on, Mr. Sia was saying earlier on, we are probably never going to go back into the 100% back into the office style of working. But we still don't know what the right balance is. And we're all going to have to figure that out as we go along. And the water will find its level, I suppose. But I don't have the answer right now. But what I am concerned about is there is that shift between, that tension between us and them. Singapore is regional headquarters for a lot of companies. And then there's also that question of, you're based here in Singapore, one of the most expensive countries in the region. But if you don't turn up into the office, then why are you based here in Singapore? You could be anywhere else in the world as well and effectively do your. So there's a lot of questions that we don't have the answers to right now.
Well, I hate to end on a pessimistic note, but perhaps an unpopular opinion here, and perhaps also shaped by the fact that I currently have a 22-year-old cousin of my wife living with us, and it's pretty depressing and frustrating to see just how entitled and spoiled he is. I think and this once again, it's unpopular opinion, personal view. I think we're all going to have to work a lot harder for a lot less going forward. But it also means that I think it's a continuation of the trend. Technology has, as we've seen to date, has really just served to sort of bifurcate the market. If you solve a problem, you fix a problem and you fix it well, like you end up as Jeff Bezos, like like the richest guy on the planet. What is it, $250 billion now or something? But then you have a sort of long tail of people who are just living in smaller and smaller and smaller apartments, having to deal with the cost of living crisis, inflation at 10%. Everything's going up except your salary. I'm sorry to be so depressing, but I feel like that's what we sort of need to prepare. At least that's what I'm doing with my kid. I'm trying to get him to work harder every single day because I think it's not going to get easier. But it's also, and once again, like I don't have any insights as to how this is all going to end. In terms, like there will need to be some kind of political reckoning, some renegotiation of the social contract, perhaps. We'll have to raise taxes, right? We'll have to redistribute wealth. We can debate about whether universal basic income is a good thing. I don't think so, but yeah. But then, I think that is the trend. I think that's how that's the direction of travel in terms of how technology has affected the nature of work, the balance of wealth and power, and I think ChatGPT and AI and everything that we've discussed today serves to almost just confirm that, really.
Okay, well, there you have some really thoughtful comments on some very big questions. Not only just the nature of work, really, but the nature of life itself, how we sustain ourselves, how cities exist, if they exist. You know, the questions you pose for Singapore, very much the questions you pose in big cities around the world. You know, the city is, you know, is essentially a meeting place, and if nobody's meeting, you know, what is the nature of those entities? And you know, it's really uncertain, I think, at this point. When you see some of the voids on the high streets, you know, certainly in big cities in the West. So it's a big set of questions. But I'm by nature an optimist, so I do think that you know, we have gone through major historical changes. Sometimes things have technology has sort of preceded our readiness to adapt, and sometimes it's, you know, been invented by the ingenuity of the people themselves. You know, I mean, I think they did try and burn printing presses or smash them up for a while, but they finally got going, and they, you know, transformed the transmission of knowledge. So I'm sure, you know, as we speak, there are people working on the ethical and regulatory challenges. I have to say, I think people working in regulations in the academic world, the regulatory concepts of AI have been talking a lot. I think they needed to have probably sprung into action rather more quickly from the sound of things, but I'm sure they will. And some of the things we're raising now perhaps will then become a more managed part of life than they appear to be now. There are always the science fiction movies that give us another scenario about how robots take over, but I'm not minded to believe that that's what will happen. But we shall see. Anyway, there were lots of questions generated by this panel. I'm really grateful for your thoughtful comments on it. The great kind of uncertainties that lie before us, I think, are recognized and described by our panelists tonight, and I really appreciate that. Lots of questions that you can take into your networked sessions. They're sort of themed, and you'll see which themes are organized around different hubs. But you can also pick up a drink and some food along the way, so we won't keep you here in this room any longer. As I say, just allows me to thank you all and thank the audience for their attentive listening and contributions. Thank you. I think you're free to leave and move into the next room. Networking, exactly.